My name is Luke O'Connor and I am the Industry Relations and Partnerships Manager for Support Act. And thank you so much for joining us today for another installment of On My Mind with the always informative Ash King. Thanks for joining us as well, Ash.
Thanks, Luke.
First things first, before we move on, I'd like to acknowledge all First Nations people who are joining us today and also the country on which we're all in, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'm joining from Melbourne, Australia, or NAM, which is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. So thank you very much for joining us. Before we progress, I'd like to acknowledge the contribution of the Amex Music Backers Program, who helped Support Act make our On My Mind workshop series happen, and also the Australian Government through the Office for the Arts. If you want to find out more about the work that Support Act is doing in the music industry, whether it's around our Crisis Relief Fund or about our mental health prevention, education and training programs, you can go to our brand new website, which is supportact.org.au, where you can apply for crisis relief funding or find out more information. In addition to that, make sure you go and check out Support Act's brand new mental health focused content series called Tune Ups, which you can find at our YouTube page, which is youtube.com/Support Act. Today's a really interesting topic, and as a singer-songwriter, Ash, I'm very excited, so I'm going to hand right over to you.
Cheers, Luke. Thanks, everybody who's joining us today from wherever you are in the world. Looks like we've got a few folks over in the US, so welcome. Just a quick intro to me. My name is Ash King. I'm a provisional psychologist and a psych researcher at the University of Sydney. And I also spent over 10 years working in the creative arts industries in radio, theatre, film and television, and music. So this topic today that we're going to be exploring is really, really close to my heart. And it seems appropriate that I'm holding this workshop from my teenage bedroom. You might see some familiar faces on the walls behind, some Freddie Mercury and Steven Tyler action. When I was a teenager was when a lot of these ideas about creativity started to sort of seep into my consciousness and even my subconsciousness, and really, I guess, inform the way that I interacted with my own sense of creativity and understood what it meant to be a creative. So I'd really like for this session to be interactive. Jump on the chat if you can, and we can talk about some of these different myths and motivations that we'll be exploring. And I also encourage you to download your copy of the activity sheet that goes with this. There will be a number of different activities that I'll leave with you after this session that you can maybe experiment or play around with, whichever ones sort of resonate and feel exciting to you, and see if they might support your own creative development. So without further ado, let's dive on in. And I also should mention that if you have any questions, you can chuck them in the Q&A section of Zoom. Check out the chat window, as our good friend Hannah has just posted today's worksheet there on the Google Drive. So if you haven't got access to that yet, you can just download it now. Let's do it. So what to expect from today's session? We're going to explore what is creativity and what it means to be a creative person. And then we're going to explore a range of myths. So Hannah, I might ask if you can chuck up the polls for us now. We're going to give you a little bit of a poll so that you can, I guess, show us what you think creativity is. So hopefully you've got a little poll window that's just popped up. And some of the, I guess, myths and motivations that we're going to be exploring is the idea around creativity having to be original. I might give you guys a little chance to fill out this poll before I keep going, because otherwise I'm going to spoil it. So there's 4 different questions there. Chuck us your response. I know that as a psychologist, I like to make space for a lot of grey area and nuance, and polls are generally about black or white, yes or no, but it'll just give us a little bit of insight as to, you know, those of you who are joining us today and kind of maybe what ideas you're carrying about creativity at the moment. So myth 1. Creativity has to be original. Definitely one that I held very close to my heart for a very long time, and I think it really held me back in substantial ways. Myth 2 is creativity arrives in a flash of insight. I think we all have, I guess, an association with that light bulb moment, that eureka moment. And, you know, some of us feel like that's how creativity should arrive for us. But we're going to explore that a little bit deeper. Myth 3, creatives are born, not made. Is creativity something that is in our blood, that is in our genes, or is it something that we can foster? Is it something that we can build throughout our own experiences? Myth number 4, structure and routine stifles creativity. Another one that hit me hard and that I never really realized that this was a myth until I started studying in the psychological fields. And I think that, you know, had I known a little bit more what I know now back then when I was working full-time in music, I might have approached things in slightly a different way. And finally, myth number 5, and an important one for us to discuss, I think, which is mental illness inspires creativity. I mean, it seems like a link, but is there a real link? And how do we know which direction the correlation goes? So we're going to have a little bit of an exploration into that one too. And finally, we're going to touch on a few motivations for living a creative life. All right, so you might see some of our results here for the poll before we get into it. So creative ideas have to be original. Yeah, a little bit of a mix. Our next one. So we've got no one out there thinking, yep, it's only in the blood. Interesting, interesting. It depends. Good one. And mental illness inspires creativity. We've got a mix. I think so. I'm not sure. I doubt it. Thanks for everybody who has answered in the poll. So we're going to dive in a little bit deeper into those myths now. Okay, first up, what is creativity and what does it mean to be a creative person? I have to say that in the research, it's quite hard to sort of strictly define what creativity is because it is so broad and encapsulates so many things. But essentially, it might come down to the process of forming something unique and valuable. So, I mean, it has application. It's something that it does for us. In its process, creativity might involve becoming sensitive to problems, deficiencies, and gaps, and missing elements, disharmonies, sort of things that maybe are missing that we could pry around with. Identifying the gaps, so seeing where those empty spaces are and searching for solutions or, you know, creative approaches that might be able to fill these gaps. Then it's about making guesses and experimenting with alternatives and solutions, modifying and retesting, so having a little bit of a play around, see what works, see what doesn't, and then sharing the results, so putting out, you know, out into the world whatever it is that you've discovered. And often it will hopefully offer a positive impact, and maybe that's to one person's life, maybe that's to thousands of people's lives, but essentially that's what we see as creativity. So then what does it mean to be a creative person? We found that creative people tend to be deeply curious about many things, and they're willing to take risks. They're also able to persevere and generate a number of ideas, responses, or experimentation. So they're able to sort of use this creative insight to make stuff, to keep making stuff. And they have imaginative and playful approaches and ideas. They're often people who value independence and autonomy, and they're aspirational in terms of what they want to do and who they wish to be. As Maya Angelou has this amazing quote that you might have heard, you can't use up creativity. The more you use, the more you have. Do any of those creative qualities resonate with you? Do you feel like, yes, I feel like I'm that type of a person. I'm someone who is imaginative and playful with ideas. Do you think that sometimes you are like this and other times you aren't? You know, does context affect how creative you feel? Times of the year, times of the day, who you're around? How inspired you feel at the time? So I think, you know, although these are quite general points, you know, and we all have ideas of what it means to be a creative person or what creative people are. And I think that a lot of these ideas are wrapped up, a lot of these points here are included in what we think about creativity and creative people. But there's also a bunch of other ideas that may be associated with these myths that we're going to explore now. And some of those ideas might be a little bit restrictive. They might not be completely accurate. So let's dive in and see what we can find. All right, myth number 1, creativity has to be original. So we didn't have too many people going in on this on the poll, but essentially when it comes to creativity, it seems that most creative ideas are evolutions, reiterations, or transformations of what has come before. So creative expression is often building on the past, building on things that have happened, whether that's, an improvement, an adjustment, or even a rebellion, going against what's come before, but still informed of what has happened previously. And so creativity can also mean improving an existing idea. And I think that when you think about, say, music, that this is a really interesting point because, there's different types of musical genres that have all sort of merged from and have been born from one another. Other types of musical styles have, I guess, tried to rebel against, different genres that have come before and are associated with a certain type of thing. And so another question to ask yourself here is, what even is original? I mean, who is the judge? Originality is subjective, and something that seems completely novel and unique to one person might seem, not so original to somebody else. So you've got to kind of ask yourself, who's the judge here? And it seems that a fresh perspective might be more essential than, laying on the pressure for, just pure originality to come out. I remember in lots of different creative fields that I was working in, playing around with different ideas and just thinking, oh no, this is crap. Someone's already done this, or someone's done this and done this better. And it can be really demoralizing. You can kind of feel like, oh, well, what's the point? But a fresh perspective might be more important. And so the question that you could ask yourself is maybe how you can broaden your worldview to invite a fusion of different ideas from various fields. So we've got Tara chatting in our chat window here, and she says, I'm imaginative with new ideas, and usually I have no problem getting started on a project. Finishing it is another story. I think that many people are going to relate to that, and one of the myths that we're about to explore might get in a little deeper into maybe why that is and maybe how we can make a shift. Because yes, it's generating heaps of amazing creative ideas is one thing, but implementing them and actually getting to work in the creative process to create something that we have sort of a finalized product at the end is a different story. And so when it comes to the originality of creativity, it looks like it's more important, I guess, to be looking outside your sort of immediate environment and combining lots of different elements that seem like they might not go together. And this seems to facilitate the creation of things that tend to be more fresh and novel. And finally, the pressure to be original can limit us from learning and growing and potentially building on what has come before. So have any of you guys had that experience where you've thought, oh, someone's already done this, or this has already been done by X, Y, and Z, and they did it better, and why should I bother? And sort of cutting yourself off from, going deeper into that experimentation, going deeper into that creative process, because you don't want to, I guess, just replicate what's come before. Something that I really realized when, I was reading heaps and heaps of, musician biographies and autobiographies. A lot of them, gave themselves the challenge to almost write a song as a different artist or as a different band. So if we've got any Beatles fans in the house, I'm a huge John Lennon fan personally, but both John and Paul used to challenge themselves to write a song, I guess, in the style of different artists that they really admired and really respected. So John Lennon wrote, "You've got to hide your love away," as a bit of a homage to Bob Dylan. You know, he was like, "Oh, I want to try to write a Bob Dylan song." So he wrote that. And when Paul McCartney wrote Helter Skelter, he was trying to write a Led Zeppelin song. So you can see how, you know, they were inspired by, you know, different types of creative output that, you know, had come before them that was different to them. But when they tried to create it, it came out a little bit differently. So we kind of always lend our own flavor to these things anyway. And so in your workbook, you'll have all these challenges listed, but I'm going to just share some cute little myth busting challenges for you in case you want to dig a little bit deeper and challenge yourself to sort of oppose these myths and sort of work through these myths in your own creative practice. So my challenge to you would be find a creative work that inspires you and aim to recreate it as precisely as possible. And then after you give that a go, I want you to ask, you know, what did you learn about creative techniques and approaches through doing this? What were the points of difference? And could these points of difference help identify what's unique about you and your approach? Or maybe they can highlight different areas that you'd like to improve in. So I've personally done this with some of my favorite artists, and I can, you know, I'd be a really crappy forger because you can always tell the difference between something that I've made and something that the originals, you know, the authentic artists have created. But it's always a really, really great learning experience and something that you might want to try. All right, let's crack into myth number 2. Creativity arrives in a flash of insight. Yes, this is that, the associations with those eureka moments, those light bulb moments, that our creativity needs to be, I guess, gifted from some otherworldly place, and there it is suddenly right there in our hands. So the history of creativity is that it was long thought to be something that we have little control over, something that comes to us spontaneously, as if from a muse. So even the meaning of the word inspiration literally sort of means to be breathed upon, as if someone has like and gifted you this amazing creative gift. But when we have a look at how the brain functions, they seem to be able to identify that the flash of insight seems to live in a certain area of our brain. And this is an area in the upper right hemisphere called the superior anterior temporal gyrus. Try to say that 5 times fast. So I'm going to challenge your superior anterior temporal gyrus right now with the following riddle. A man has married 20 women in a small town. All of the women are still alive and none divorced. The man has broken no laws. Who is the man? See if you can chuck your answer in the response if you know. Awesome, Erin. So the pastor, preacher, priest. Perfect. So if you came up with the answer, it's likely that you had a spike in this area of your brain, because this is the part of the brain which helps us connect weakly related pieces of information. You know, there's not really strong neural connections between those parts of the brain, but we kind of need them to find, you know, I guess the thought or the answer to find its own path. And if we want to gain better access to this part of the brain, we sometimes don't really even need to focus harder or deeper on the problem. Instead, it shows that if we distract ourselves or if we relax, can actually help. So there was a study that this was based on where they ended up showing someone sort of a funny clip, like a funny YouTube clip, kind of got them distracted a little bit, chilled them out a little bit. They returned to the puzzle and were able to solve it quicker. So when we distract ourselves or relax, sometimes this helps us to turn our attention to the part of the brain connecting all the dots and allowing, you know, those areas that do connect all the dots together to show up for us. It shows, you know, I think that all of us know that you can't force creativity, but it seems like you can give it room to breathe. And when we, you know, I guess, get away from the problem and maybe get some perspective, maybe get some rest or relaxation, we tend to find that maybe we have access to, I guess, solutions or different approaches a little bit easier. So here is your myth busting challenge for this. So instead of forcing yourself to overthink to solve problems, can you allow yourself to pause? I would love to hear if any of you have an approach, when you kind of get stuck, maybe you feel like you have a creative block, maybe you have, demands or deadlines and you just really feel like, you need to solve this problem ASAP. Is there certain things that you do that help you in those scenarios? Like, so do you tend to try and distract yourself? Do you ever go, you know what, I'm going to leave this for today and tomorrow, I'm going to relax, I'm going to recharge, I'm going to engage in some self-care? Or do you literally try and flog yourself, no, you have to do this, no, you have to do this, lots of very direct, maybe aggressive or critical self-talk, and try and bully yourself into finishing or creating? I'd love to hear. So Tara says, I sleep on it. The answer usually comes to me in the morning. Amazing. It shows that when we sleep, we often consolidate a lot of our learning and experiences. So when we sleep, we are given that space and that relaxation to be able to sort of wake up the next day and allow those dots to, connect with one another. All right, let's keep going on. This is also a favorite quote of mine that I saw, which is, creativity is the residue of time wasted. Sometimes we just have to do nothing. And, what did John Lennon say about, time that you enjoy wasting wasn't wasted anyway. All right, our next one, myth number 3, creatives are born, not made. All right, so creativity is not genetic, but sometimes it can appear that way, as creative parents can often pass down their creative approaches and outlooks as a way of life. So, creative parents tend to teach their kids, show their kids a creative way of seeing the world. And this is why it seems maybe that like creative parents tend to have creative children. A lot of the time you'll think, oh, your parents are musicians, are you a musician? I know that a lot of my friends who are musicians always get asked, oh, like, where did you get that talent from? Everyone's always really curious. They think that it was passed down in some ways, but often you'll find that it actually isn't. But there is a big problem, I guess, with holding too closely to this myth in particular, which is that people try to be creative, I guess, once or twice, and then they give up when the first few attempts don't produce like a tangible token of their genius. And they think, oh, well, I'm obviously not a creative person. Like, yeah, it's just like, it's not in me. No, I don't have the talent, I don't have the gift. Whereas this is actually an example of something that we call a fixed mindset. It kind of says that things have to be one way or the other way. There's not a lot of room for grey area, for nuance, and it leaves little room for improvement and for growth. And research has really shown, though, that creativity is a bit more like a muscle and something that can be developed. The more you work with it and the more you work on it, the stronger it becomes. So the more creative you allow your life to be, it kind of shows that you'll kind of reap the rewards of having sort of more creative ideas and approaches come into your life. So the main, answer to this is pretty much to be engaging in the act of creating over and over again. Like, just don't stop. Because as with any new skill, the first few thousand attempts will probably suck and the process is painful and frustrating. But you'll have to just remember and tell yourself that the human mind is built for creative problem solving. Like, how do you think that we have lived this many hundreds and thousands of years? Like, we have been solving problems from the dawn of time, from creating the wheel to, making fire, right now to hopefully, solving and reversing some of the issues with climate change. We are incredibly creative beings, just being human. So it seems like, we are all born to be creative, and we are all essentially creative beings. But what it seems is that creativity is not so much something that we learn, but unlearn as we get older. You might have heard that quote, which is, the creative adult is the child who survives, which is a really beautiful and also kind of sad thing to think about. because there's been some studies that have, I guess, tested people on creativity measures and assessments, through their lifespan. And it shows, a kid who's 7 years old, a kid who's 15 years old, someone who's in their 20s, up to, when they're in their 50s. And in a lot of these studies, it seems that the level of creativity tends to kind of continue to drop as we get older and older. I suppose that some people don't think that it's necessary to be creative anymore. Some people don't, I guess, keep using that muscle, that one that they had when they were a kid and that they used to play around with so much. Because when we're kids, we hopefully have a lot of time and space to, be curious and play around and ask questions and try new things. So this myth-busting challenge is, I'd love for you to think back to a creative activity that you enjoyed as a child. Was it creating art, dance, writing? Are there any things that come up into mind for you guys who are with us today? Anything that you loved doing as a kid that really sort of lit you up, that really kept you really curious, made you play, maybe, connected with that sense of flow? I know that when I was painting, yeah, beautiful. When I was a kid, I used to love to do drama. I used to love to pretend to be a bunch of different characters and play around with that. And that was something that I really loved that I sort of haven't done in a really long time. So I might have to do this too. I would like for you to maybe revisit this activity again and try to revisit it with the same sense of curiosity and wonder. Ask yourself, how does it feel to engage in this again? Does it feel different? How does it feel the same? And Tara said all of it: private music lessons, ballet, art lessons, creative writing classes. Yes, as kids, our creativity was often really, really encouraged and supported. And somewhere along the way, it became less important. And so I think that it's always important. It's always valuable. It doesn't matter if you aren't in the sort of an official creative arts industry, because creativity will come in handy in all different areas of our lives, essentially. All right, let's jump into myth number 4. And this was one that I was referring to a little bit earlier, I think, Tara, when you mentioned about, having some great ideas and not always being able to implement them, which is that structure and routine stifles creativity. So structure and routine can seem like the antithesis to creativity, as they're not what we usually associate with the enduring concept of the creative person. When we think of creative genius, we think of someone who is messy and chaotic, eccentric and brilliant. There's so many examples in the media, different famous creatives that we can recollect. So we imagine them having things like studios or offices that are littered with garbage and everything's everywhere, and they kind of have really disconnected relationships, and they're a little bit, all over the place all the time. This is kind of the idea that we tend to hold when we think about what it means to be a creative person. And this is almost what I was referring to a little bit earlier when I said there's some ideas that hold us back from being able to harness our full creative self. And this is one of them. So I think that we really need to acknowledge that structure should not be seen as something that stifles creativity, but rather something that makes space for the mind to exercise the creative process. So almost like when we provide some structure around our creative process, we are making it important and making a space for it to exist in our lives. Now, we each have unique relationships with our own creativity, and we do need to understand the circumstances in which it's best harnessed for us, but is also sustainable. So, and we'll explore in one of the next myths about things to do with sort of mania associated with different types of mental illness, and how, you can go through different periods where you feel so productive and so inspired and so motivated. But what we genuinely want is also to sustain be able to sustain this practice. And while we might have a peak of these periods, once every blue moon, that's not going to be enough to continue creating and to continue experimenting with new things. So we actually need to find something that works for us. That's also something that we can keep going in our lives. Because prolific, dedicated creativity requires an ongoing commitment, and we tend to need to make time for it in our busy lives. So it's so easy, I guess, to just have ideas, because ideas don't require you to nut out any space, really, in your day. Like, they can just show up whenever and wherever. And hopefully maybe we might harness them by writing them down, taking a voice memo. We want to capture them in some way, but then what do you do with them? Like, how do we take these little seeds and make something, fully realized? And this is where our next challenge comes in handy. So I would like to challenge you to break a creative project into different size increments that will each meaningfully contribute to your creative practice. So think of something that you maybe want to start working on. Maybe you already have started working on it, kind of on and off. Then I want you to ask yourself, in relation to this creative project, what can you do in 5 minutes that will contribute meaningfully to it? It could just be little things. Maybe it's sending an email. Maybe it's making some notes on your notes app. Maybe it's sharing it with a friend for some feedback, for some quick and dirty feedback. Then ask yourself, in 30 minutes, what is doable in 30 minutes? We are busy, but I bet that you can squeeze in a cool 30 minutes somewhere in your week. Like, quite honestly, I spend more than that on social media apps in one day, which is kind of slightly grim. But also it means that when we think about how we can make space for things, we usually can find the time. And finally, in 1 hour, what can you do in 1 hour to meaningfully contribute to this project? And now, if you've thought about those different things that are possibly something that you can do, you then want to find your calendar and schedule these times into your week. You want to make time and make a priority of these tasks. It's shown time and time again, from, people who want to start an exercise regime, people who want to start writing a novel, if we make time and space for these commitments, it's much more likely that we can actually start to make a headway at creating something real and finished and realized. Something else that I didn't put here, but that's also important for some people is, to be accountable. So sometimes you'll find, if it's to do with your work, you might always get your work project in on time. You might always have something to submit when a certain day comes around and you've been given a task that you needed to fulfill. But when it's just down to us and we're doing something that we want to do just for us, we can often just be like, oh, this isn't important. No, I don't need to worry about this. And so it gets, I guess, like just chucked out or just burning there in the sidelines for us to, I guess, get motivated again. So sometimes when we have someone who's holding us accountable, we can, I guess, come through a little bit more with reaching certain types of milestones or making contributions towards our creative projects. So maybe you have a friend, maybe you have a partner, someone who is really excited and inspired by the art that you create, the things that you build. And so talk to them about your ideas, share with them what you want to do and say, hey, in a month's time, I'd really like to just show you the bones of this project, or I'd really like to share a little bit of something with you in 2 weeks. Like, can you message me? Let me know that, you're ready to hear it then. And that means that you've got someone to be accountable to. And sometimes that works for some people. Alrighty. So this next one is pretty big and juicy and something that we can maybe explore a little bit. So like jump on the chat and sort of ask questions and share your experiences here. our myth number 5 is that mental illness inspires creativity. Now, this one in our poll, people were a little bit, I guess, we were kind of divided on this myth in particular. Some of us said, yes, I think so. Some of us said, I'm not sure. Some of us said, no. So again, just like take a moment to check in with, I guess, what you associate when it comes to mental illness and it comes to creativity. Like, are these things that are linked in your understanding of other creative people? Are these things that are linked in your understanding of your own creativity and maybe your own personal struggles with mental health issues? Okay, so links between mental illness and creativity have long been speculated. I mean, why does it seem as if so many creative people from history have struggled with mental health? And I reckon that, you know, if I asked you to name 5 people, 5 creative people that you can think of who had mental health issues, that you would be able to name them pretty quickly. They're usually highly visible in their industries. And sometimes, you know, yeah, Tara says Kurt Cobain. I mean, like, most of the musos in the 27 Club. So if anyone's not familiar with that, it's a group of musicians who all kind of seems to die by the age of 27. A lot of them struggled with substance use. A lot of them did seem to have mental health issues. So Joya says, poor mental health, creativity is a part of my mental health. Yeah, awesome. So I think what we're exploring here is like a little bit more down the sort of mental illness spectrum. Of course, there is a spectrum of mental health. And I guess what we want to be getting into here is if the sort of mental illness side of our mental health spectrum is directly related to our creativity and the output of our creative work. So studies using test or clinical assessments have not proven a connection between creativity and mental illness. So there has been a lot of different studies done on this because people find it, I mean, interesting, and they find it important, you know, because a lot of creative people often say, you know, I don't want to sort out my mental health because, you know, being depressed is what helps me be an artist. People say, oh, if I stopped using drugs, I won't be able to make art anymore the way that I have. So a lot of people are scared, I guess, to potentially sever their connection to their creative muse. And for a lot of people, they think that, you know, that mental illness offers them a link to this creative inspiration. So what we do know in studies is that people who work in the arts industries report higher levels of mental illness and suicidal ideation than those in the general public. So we ask, you know, why is this? There's no link that, you know, people who are more mentally ill are going to be drawn to creative industries necessarily. It seems to be that the correlations are due to the artistic lifestyle. And that is often, not always, but sometimes poor finances, poor living conditions, the fact that it's a really competitive and demanding industry. There's also demands of multiple jobs, like you have to wear heaps of different hats when you're creative, you know, manage yourself sometimes. There's also periods of unemployment, which might be something that resonates with people at the moment in the wake of COVID. And unconventional working conditions. So, you know, definitely when I was working full-time in the industry, it was heaps and heaps of really late nights. I would have a really disrupted sleeping schedule. My days would be really different. So maybe one day I'd be having a gig at, you know, 11 in the morning, and the next day I'd be working until, you know, 1:30, 2 in the morning. So different working conditions, you know, like up and down, sporadic, you know, shift work, I guess, has been shown to really correlate with lower well-being when it comes to mental health. There's also personal isolation. You know, people maybe can cut themselves off. Definitely personal isolation since COVID and lockdown and quarantine. There's also, late nights, like I said, and substance abuse. Generally it's a lot easier to access things like drugs, alcohol. Definitely when I was working, I would get, free drinks on the bar every night. And honestly, it was hard to say no. I probably didn't say no. Most times when I was at work, I was also, kicking back and having a drink every hour. So, I mean, these are quite unique types of experiences. Like, you wouldn't talk to someone who works in an office environment and, they have a drink every hour. At least they wouldn't be able to do it in sightline of their boss, probably. But what I think is something that definitely could be explored is our understanding of our own creative identity, or what a creative identity means to us. And in here, you need to ask, do you need to believe that to be a true artist or creative, you must be in some way tortured or suffering? Again, those are really popular archetypes that we associate with the creative genius. You must, be tortured or suffering to have that sense of depth, to be able to have that inspiration. I don't know how many times I've heard somebody say, oh, I can't wait until this certain musician breaks up with their partner, because then we'll get like a really good, juicy breakup album. It's kind of, I guess, a bit sadistic, right? That we think that you can only be creative when you're suffering, when you're going through really hard, painful experiences. So I would love to hear if any of you have, I guess, opinions on this, if this myth has been something that you've held close to you for a while, something that you've maybe, juggled with, that you've struggled with, and what you think, the connection between mental illness and creativity might be. So jump onto the chat and share your own experience and your own opinion and understanding of this. So I've also got a little myth busting challenge here. So yes, I've got Timothy, who is offering a really important point here, which is therapeutic. The therapeutic powers of creation and access to art. A lot of creative people say that they are drawn to art because it offers a kind of catharsis, a way that they can work through their pain, a way that they can make sense of their struggle and sort of get it out of here and get it out into, I guess, into music, into art, into movement, into whatever sort of different creative field that they might exist in. So there is a lot of evidence that that approach is quite adaptive and productive and helpful. There's things like art therapy, there's things like music therapy. The arts are ways that we can help people connect with themselves and help connect with their authenticity, help connect and make sense of their stories narratives of struggle, of pain, of overcoming obstacles. So there is an amazing power for art to do that for us, for sure. So this little challenge here asks you to explore destructive and restrictive ideas related to your own creativity and ask how you might challenge these. So, for example, to be creative, I must be, something like unhappy, or a drug user, or isolated from friends and family, I guess for a more extended period of time, grinding constantly. As a mental health practitioner, I see these different things come up, and people who have, an enduring relationship with unhappiness, saying that they have to be unhappy, they must be unhappy, or they must continue to use drugs. They tend to not take themselves to places that you would then associate to be, fertile ground for a lot of amazing innovation and creativity. What they tend to do is just, I guess, dig them deeper and deeper into quite a bleak and destructive lifestyle and inner world. So I think that that's what we need to, I guess, confront. All right, we've got a few We've got a few great points here. So I'm going to read Joya's. There is not a more creative industry than aerospace, which requires a lot of mental discipline. Mental illness can disrupt the creative process, which the structure of science can bring you back to center, where creativity can kick back in. Yes, amazing. There is a lot of research in that area too. So I think that when we hang on to this idea that like that mental illness is like the seeds of creativity, we can also, keep ourselves blind to the fact that mental illness can also disrupt the creative process, which is important to note. And Tara here says, I have been trying to make sense of things that have happened in my life, whether happy or sad, and turn it into art or anything that lasts. It's a way for my brain to organize itself and find meaning. Yes, absolutely. Beautifully put, Tara. And definitely, that is the idea behind a lot of the artistic therapies that we can use to help facilitate people's healing and growth. Okay, so we're almost done. And this last one, we're going to just chat about a few different motivations, I guess, healthy ways that we can continue to drive ourselves and continue to be creating. Sorry, it's like I'm talking and I'm like reading the chat and obviously just sounding like a big jumble of words. But we've got Joy saying that I find that as a musician, I can dive into the structure of music and open doors for new musical ideas to flow. Beautifully put. And I think that that's a beautiful, I guess, expression of, one of those myths that we busted earlier, that idea that creativity needs to be original. It's like, no, you can allow yourself to dive into maybe songs that already exist and see, what different seeds might be planted within you after listening to that piece, or, sitting behind an instrument and just allowing yourself to play. And that's kind of what we're about to chat about now. So motivation, when it comes to creativity, experiment, be curious, seek out new knowledge and information, introduce yourself to new perspectives, play, and rest. So a little bit in line with what we chatted before about structure and routine, you want to make regular time to commit to creative projects, at times to, play around with experimentation or finding new perspectives. So it can be helpful to set time aside. I don't know if anyone's read a book called The Artist's Way, but she has a recommendation for you to, I guess, take yourself out on a date, like, a creativity or an artist's date, go to a gallery or go out, walking through a rainforest, or, sit down with an amazing book and see what ideas and perspectives you might confront and how that might help and might be integrated in, your different creative projects. Another interesting point when it comes to motivation and execution of creative ideas is that you want to allow yourself space to create freely and non-judgmentally. So you want to resist the temptation to edit as you create. Save revisions for another time. So if any of you are self-confessed perfectionists, this one might sort of ring some bells for you. I know that it's definitely something that I was like, whoa, when I learned this for the first time. You kind of create, and as you're creating, you want it to be perfect in the moment. You want it to spill out of you in like all its completely realized and perfect glory. And the reality is that usually never happens. So sometimes you just need to let it out. You just need to let it out. You just need to get it out. And then you just need to leave it and sometimes come back to it and see, it with fresh eyes and go, okay, how can I make this better? How can I make this different? How can I make this interesting? Another really important point is reconnect with your intrinsic motivations to create. Ask how being creative connects you to the person that you most want to be, and the life you most want to live. So there's a really interesting study that was done a number of years back. I think it was one with a creative college based in Chicago. They measured the different levels of and styles of motivation for different art students. So they, I guess, found the students who were more extrinsically motivated. So those students, for them, creating art was really about getting approval from other people, I guess, potentially making money, looking impressive, I guess gaining a lot of attention and praise. And then there was also, the art students who were more intrinsically motivated. So they created art because they felt like it was something that they were, I guess, made to do, that they wanted to play, they wanted to experiment, they wanted to play around with this idea of mastery, be able to get better at things, to be able to improve and to learn. They wanted to connect with that sense of flow. When you really find yourself in the zone, they wanted to get there. And so that's what drove them to be artists. So they went back to these art students a number of years later and wanted to see how they were tracking. How were their careers going? Were they still creating art? Were they still existing in the industry? And interestingly enough, they found that the students who are more intrinsically motivated tended to be more reliably still working in the industry after a certain amount of time, and were also generally more successful in their careers. So the people who were driven by these inner motivations, these motivations that, I guess being an artist, being a creative was, the type of person that they really wanted to be and connected with the type of life they wanted to live, they were able to exist longer in the industry and have more success. And finally, one that often gets deeply neglected is this idea of self-care and taking care of ourselves. We often think, oh, that comes last, everything else, particularly when life gets a lot, like life gets busy, everything else seems to, go to the top of our list, and self-care and rest seems to tumble all the way down to the very bottom. But, like we explored, those moments of rest and rejuvenation really help us to form those different neural connections in the mind, which help us link sort of unrelated pieces of information and data. And they're just bloody good for you. Self-care, rest, and relaxation, they will not only help your creativity, but they will help your mood. They will help strengthen your relationships. Giving yourself to take time out and to recharge is really, really important. And if you're going to sit with me in a therapy room, it would be one of the first things that I would check in with you. What do you do to take care of yourself? What do you do to maintain that your cup isn't completely empty all the time? You want to be filling that cup on a regular basis. Just like your phone, you want to be plugging in and charging yourself every once in a while, because you just can't keep operating on empty. It's a surefire way to hit burnout hard and fast. So our next On My Mind workshop is actually exploring self-care strategies for the 21st century. And Joya has mentioned a really great and essential point here. Expressing my creative ideas is essential to my self-care. So being creative can actually be an act of self-care. And a lot of people that I know, are living examples of this. People go and do a dance class, or they spend some time writing music, or they spend some time writing poetry or stories. They spend some time painting. And for that, for them, it's these really, I guess, important rituals that they keep consistent throughout their lives, because they know how nourishing and nurturing those behaviors and those artistic practices are for them. So 100% expressing your creative ideas may be an act of self-care, and hopefully it's kind of like a regenerative process, because then, when you're expressing these creative ideas, you're also learning more about the process of creativity and hopefully generating even more creative ideas in the process. And this little icon here is something that I've included in your activity books. It's from a book by Brandon Stussy, and it's called Make Time for Creativity. So I've actually chucked a few book recs in here, but I thought we would finish off this chat with one of my favorite quotes. I think following Nick Cave's, I guess, Q&A blog that he emails out called The Red Hand Files every week is kind of an act of self-care for me. And this was one of his amazingly eloquent quotes when someone asked, is shitty art worth making? He said, as for shitty art, all art is perfectly imperfect, like the world itself. And to some extent, value judgments on art are largely subjective and beside the point. Creating art is about growing the world and increasing its reach. And it has more to do with the act of creation itself than what is actually made. Anything that animates us creatively in a positive way, be it the grand design of a great architectural wonder or the big bang of a child's drawing, is a reenactment of the original creation story. Whether we realize it or not, making art is a religious encounter, as it is our attempts to grow beyond ourselves that energize the soul of the universe. He always has a pretty special way with words, this man. And so if this is a topic that really interests you and you want to keep, I guess, expanding your knowledge and creative practice, here are a couple of books that I recommend. Elizabeth Gilbert's book, Big Magic, you might have heard of. Make Time for Creativity was the one that I just mentioned earlier. And you can actually just get that as an ebook online on Amazon. And The Artist's Way is another one that's really popular amongst the creative community, as it offers a lot of, I guess, practical sort of activities that you can do on a regular basis that are sort of built to get your creative juices flowing. And as always, Support Act are doing incredible work for everyone in the Australian arts industries. If you need to chat to someone and are feeling like you're doing it tough at the moment, please give them a call on the Wellbeing helpline. They also have helplines dedicated to our Indigenous community, as well as people who work for artist management. So jump on their website. They also offer crisis, relief funding grants if you need a little bit of extra cash to help keep you going during this difficult time. And there's also lots of tips and resources on there for you to sort of read up on if you want to help yourself or help a mate who's struggling. So they've just zhuzhed up their website. I recommend giving it a click and heading up there. Thank you so much for joining me. And if you have any things that you want to, I guess, share or chat about, feel free to come find me on Instagram. My handle is @ashking. And you can follow at _indigo_project for the psychological organization that I work for too. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. It's been a real joy and pleasure. I hope that you learned a couple of things new. Thanks to everyone who contributed in the chat. I really loved hearing your takes on things. And I really loved hearing about your own experiences. Joya said something really beautiful, lovely presentation. Thank you for your creative ideas and your compassion for us creatives. Look, I include myself amongst you, and I have so much love and respect for anyone who decides to, eke out a living within the creative arts industries, because it can be such a challenge. It can be really hard. It can feel like there's no visibility, but rest assured there are companies like Support Act that are always out there looking for you and looking out for you and looking out for your well-being. So I'd love to see you again at one of our future workshops. You can sign up for our next one, which is happening on April 9th. It's all about self-care in the 21st century. So have a fantastic weekend. Have a great week, and hopefully I'll be seeing you soon. Thanks, everyone.